Hey, everybody, welcome to the ReCoop. I'm Cooper Daniels, and I'm a guy that knows a little about a lot. And today I have a special episode. I am here with Michael Cotton once again. He is the co founder of Meld Ventures and ALGO Mint and everything else. How you doing, Michael?
Good, Coop. How are you, mate? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is your third or fourth time on the show.
I was trying to think of this morning. I'm not 100% sure, but it is one of the two. So we're 50-50 chance of getting it right.
Yeah. Well, I think this is our third on just my show, and then we also had that conversation at Algo Fest last year.
Okay, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and a lot's happened over the years, or the year, not even a year.
Well, look, the problem is in the blockchain space, time goes 5-10x the
Yeah,
speed. So a year
yeah.
is 10 crypto years.
So last time we talked, it was just I think like it was like 2 days after the Mint IDO. And a lot has changed, a lot is happening right now. I thought that this would be a good time to have you back on. You've been in the Algorand ecosystem from the beginning, and you're building, and you've been building on Algorand for a while. So I thought maybe with all of the kind of, I don't know, everything's just going haywire. Today's actually, interesting because Algorand kind of dunked on the Ethereum Foundation, and the market is having some weird relief rally right now. But so people are feeling a little better, but still, overall, it's hard. So I thought it'd be a good time to catch up with you. But before we get into all of that, how are you doing? How is Meld Ventures? How is Algo Mint? Anything new to report?
Mate, we're all good here. I think in reality, at the moment, our core focus is what does the next sort of 2 years look like? And across the portfolio for Meld Ventures, we're really leaning into making sure that all the teams understand what's happening, are thinking about what their burn rate looks like, thinking about what their team looks like, thinking about what their product needs to look like, reassessing the fundamentals, and ensuring that they're really sort of strengthening themselves for the next sort of couple of years. We think 2 years is about the sort of prep time for most projects to be feeling pretty comfortable with getting through this period. So we're sort of really leaning into that. Between the team, AJ, Dustin, and myself, we all have really different skills. So each of us are taking the time to talk to the projects and just making sure they have what they need, and if
Mhm.
they need extra support in getting there, and what they're missing, and how we can ensure that they're sort of prepped for this battle ahead.
So yes, so you're speaking, as Meld Ventures from that perspective, right? So maybe if the audience doesn't know, what are some of the protocols or the projects that Meld Ventures supports?
Yeah, okay, very really good question. So it's over 50 projects now in total in the
Mhm.
ecosystem. That ranges from everything from Algorand, which is one of our own internal incubator projects, through
Mhm.
things like Pact, Tiny Man, XBacked, Pollenize, Meadow Labs with the amazing Australia Zoo launch we've seen in the last couple of days.
That was so fun.
Oh man, it was brilliant. The guys did a great job, and awesome to see. I don't know if you looked at the stats, the number of new NFT holders that came into the ecosystem. Like, it was just a really really great result, and all the money going to such a great cause too, which was great.
Well, and that's partly, I'm sure, why it's going so well. It just shows, like, even right now, during when everybody's kind of hurting, people want to support the Algorand, ecosystem likes to support, and it's cool art, and it's fun, and it's going to help wildlife. So that's cool.
And the team were up for something insane. I can't remember what it was, but it ended up being like 21 hours. Keeping in mind that 100% of the sale went to Australia Zoo, so it wasn't like they were working night and day for a profit. It was really to
Yeah,
draw these funds over to wildlife conservation.
that's
Um,
fantastic.
I'm going to get slightly sidetracked, but I'll tell you my thoughts on the overall. I do this
Okay.
every time, Coop. I don't know what we expect,
I
but
know
this
we
is.
we always do that. And before you tell me your thoughts, I want to know your thoughts. But I just want, we're seeing Celsius on the verge of implosion. We've watched Terra Luna implode. We're seeing where things are dying. Can you just reassure everybody in the Algorand ecosystem that their goBTC and goETH is still in good hands?
Look, completely, look,
Okay.
100%. And I think one of the interesting questions I actually think came up lately, which was fairly significant in the Celsius downfall, was STETH. And it's probably good to define the difference. ST ETH is staked ETH on Lido. The key difference there is it's an undefined amount of time before that ETH will actually really be freed up with the merge in ETH 2.0, which is a very different scenario with actual wraps available to withdraw and unwrap or bridge back to native Ethereum. So it's a live process, so you can come and go as you please. Whereas with ST ETH, the real issue was it was an undefined amount of time, which meant if you need to exit, you need to sell, which is really where we saw a lot of issues for Celsius because their position in ST ETH was humongous. And that, is compounded across a whole range of different areas that have similar issues. But thankfully with ALGO Mint, it's quite a different process. And I suppose if I talk about the Meld Ventures advice as well to projects, ALGO Mint is one of those projects that has to listen to that same advice. And, talking to yourself most of the time gets you locked up, but we've done a little bit of that in recent days. Yeah. And, in reality for ALGO Mint, our real focus now is, number one, building strong tech and solid tech that will have utility and bring value to the ecosystem, but also ensuring that we see fundamentals in the project. So the project is actually revenue generating while adding value that makes sense for that revenue generation. So we're sort of really leaning in, and we'll see an updated roadmap soon around what things should we be focusing on to build to that specific product roadmap. So you'll see an updated roadmap in the months to come that will really help define what our plan is around that to ensure we're creating useful products that are revenue generating, that mean we have, a long-term business model for something like ALGO Mint.
Great.
But yes, it's all safe is the short answer.
So everything's safe. If everybody wants, if there's a run on goETH and goBTC, everybody can redeem. Gotcha.
Exactly.
We like it. Okay, cool. All right. So here we are. I just got back from Consensus. During Consensus, there was a bit of an uproar over LimeWire doing their first NFT project on Ethereum and their token being an ERC20. I mean, there's been a lot that's kind of, beating down on the Algorand community, really, and just being like, oh man, like what's going on? So I don't know, just in general, tell us what your thoughts are on all of it.
So look, something good as sort of for transparency, we also are an investor in LimeWire. So Meld Ventures invested in LimeWire. Okay. So we met the team quite early on. I probably have a slightly different look and maybe a slightly controversial view on what's happening with LimeWire. For starters, I can completely appreciate where the community is coming from. I can sort of, the dream scenario is it's all built on Algorand, which would make, an incredible amount of sense for all of us that are true believers. In reality, projects like LimeWire that will have such a public face, helping to bring people to Algorand, I think is really where we see a lot of value creation. I think a part of that is, obviously I'm preaching to the choir, but you and I, Coop, we both are incredibly strong proponents of Algorand tech. And I think users in Ethereum, maybe purchasing the NFTs, coming to the LimeWire application and starting to use Algorand tech and realizing, wow, this is actually way better than what I just did 10 minutes ago. I think will actually be incredibly valuable, and we think it'll be incredibly useful. What we'd like to see from LimeWire, and I don't think anyone out there would disagree, I'd like to see them not only issued on Ethereum. I think it would be brilliant to have them where you can actually have them held on Ethereum or Algorand and participate as an OG regardless. Likewise for the ERC20 token, the LimeWire token. I do think we will see that happen. I think it's a natural progression. I'd rather see it happen sooner rather than later. But, for us, I think we're really taking the view that this is a really interesting opportunity to use such a huge brand to gain exposure to an Ethereum, ecosystem and the Ethereum NFT collectors and users that want to access LimeWire, who will actually get some direct exposure to Algorand tech and how powerful it actually is.
Yeah. And something that I've said, and I think it's a kind of a cold reality, but if, there were a 10,000 piece NFT collection going for $700 on Algorand, it's not going to succeed,
No, and look, it's sad. I feel like a little bit hurt on the inside saying it.
I'm sorry to hurt you. Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. And I think overall too, and look, we've had, Ethereum with everything going on in the last 24 hours between Ethereum and Algorand.
Hmm.
I think most of us feel even more strongly about both the Algorand team. Paul's response was incredibly professional, and
Yeah.
I think he did a great job in coming back to Ethereum's the Ethereum Foundation post. But
Hmm.
I think on top of that, what we also face as a collective is, and Algorand faces this more problem more than anyone else because it's bundled in with all the other text to the broader community. And I think we saw this a lot with Australia Zoo. I don't know if anyone looked at Robert Irwin's post about the NFT drop. Everyone instantly assumes, it's bad for the environment. It's a terrible technology. You shouldn't be using it. Why would you do fundraising with this kind of technology? And
Right.
I think collectively blockchain faces this issue. A lot of the sentiment out there is this is bad tech. This is bad for the environment technology. This is where all the scams happen. And it's
Hmm.
not a reality for Algorand, but collectively the blockchain community needs to see that mindset change of the public. And I think as the community, we also need to be really conscious that which thankfully the Algorand community is brilliant at this, is we need to be informative. We need to be helping people with educating them on exactly what this tech is. We need to be patient because most of the reaction out there, and we saw it with Bob's post, was really quite instantly negative. It's that sort of knee-jerk reaction of, oh, how could you? How terrible. And
Yeah.
it's going to take patience and time and consistency in getting the message out that, hey, no, this is different. Algorand tech is different. Blockchain isn't just this terrible technology. Like all early technologies, it's tough at the beginning. It's clunky. It's painful. It's not perfect. But the intention is that the fundamentals make sense, and
Yeah.
through dedicated teams like the Algorand team, we'll see incredible tech delivered that can really change the course of what this kind of tech can do.
Yeah. And the fact that, I mean, that does exist out there at every kind of Twitter post about blockchain and NFTs that isn't like specifically in crypto Twitter. It always has so many of these kind of like, this is terrible for the environment. It's just a bunch of, crypto bros and, negativity and, the dark side, whatever, all the stuff that people think that crypto is, that some of it is that, but like Bitcoin uses a lot of energy. I mean, we can't deny the facts, but still.
No, exactly right. And I
Yeah.
think this is the key issue, is that we are just really seeing this bundling of Algorand in with everything else,
Yeah.
which just isn't accurate. I feel like it's back in the internet days. It was almost like if it was on the internet, it was terrible back in early internet days, and it's
Yeah.
not. That's it's not relative. It's not directly comparable.
Yeah.
So I think, but what's really fascinating on the Australia Zoo side with their release, is that in reality the way that they underwent this fundraising made it more easily available globally to almost anyone in the world that wanted to participate, allowed it
Hmm.
to happen at extremely low cost with very little friction for any country in the world,
Hmm.
and had almost no carbon footprint compared to traditional fundraising methods. So on
Yeah.
the average style of fundraising method, it was more environmentally friendly, it was more accessible, and it was lower cost to run. It's a great example of why this
That's what's insane.
technology is the future.
Yeah, and it's a great example to other things like the Australian Zoo, and wait, the zoo, Australian Zoo's doing this, and they're like, oh, this is carbon negative. It's a good thing for people to see. I will say, just to kind of go back for a second, back to LimeWire briefly. I think the main concern, or at least it was the main concern that I had, is that it seemed like the Algorand team was a little blindsided by the news. And so that was part of mine being like, okay, well, what is happening? Like, are they being misleading? Like, did you know? That seemed to be my main struggle with what happened with LimeWire. And then their Discord communication was terrible, but that's whatever. That's just a group of guys on Discord. But yeah, so that was my main issue.
And look, and I can't actually comment because I'm not privy to sort of what went on between Algorand themselves and
Yeah,
LimeWire.
right.
We just sort of had our interactions with the team, talked about the artists they're bringing, talked to them about the kind of product they're trying to build,
Hmm.
and I think we overall liked the concept of um, less didn't like the concept of the Ethereum piece as much, but liked the concept of the overall product and what it
Got
could
it.
do for
Yeah.
artists. So that was the piece that sort of really resonated with us. Plus, they've got a pretty incredible lineup of artists that they are bringing onto the platform too, which is great.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it seems like it's still, and most of the real activity is going to be happening on Algorand. So
Well,
that's
and look,
that's a positive.
state proofs out next month, and we'll start to see a lot more development around there. Which in the dream scenarios, we see those NFTs, those 10,000 NFTs in the ERC20 token, actually finding a native home on Algorand.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So, I mean, another something that happened today is that the voting closed, and so you're in the Algorand DeFi space. It seems very clear that the doubling of the voting power for DeFi lost. That did not win. But I've talked to a few people recently, Michelle Dada recently on the show, and there seems to be a really kind of negative sentiment about how governance is going. It seems like people are kind of like, this is a waste of, for these like early adopters, they're just kind of getting all of this algo. It's inflationary. And what are they actually doing for the ecosystem? So clearly this vote was meant to at least attempt to address that. What are your thoughts on governance?
Good question, Coop. Look,
that look over there kind of indicated, all right, what should I really say? Anyways, okay.
Look,
I am sweating. By the way, if the audience out there keeps on seeing me check, I'm just like shiny and like dripping right now. But anyway,
well, I'm in Australia, so it's winter here now. So
is it?
I've got UGG boots on.
Do you really? Yeah, no, it's like 104, and I have the air conditioner off because of the noise, and I'm like in the sauna talking to Michael Cotton in the sauna.
So look, governance. I do agree with Michelle. I think we are seeing an incredibly high yield for what is incredibly low risk participation in the ecosystem. I think we ideally, I would like to see two key things. Number one, either the emission schedule reduced by reducing that reward profile, channeling those algos into DeFi growth, I think would be really valuable, because if we sort of zoom out to what do we need right now, at a bare minimum, and people might have heard me say this before, but at the bare minimum, we need to be able to trade algo in volume on Algorand. Like that should be our minimum goal. You can come and you can buy 20 grand worth of algo without it actually being 0.5% cheaper once you take into account slippage, to go to a CX, because that should be a absolute basic for us. Is buying algo with USDC should be a very simple, basic, fundamental piece we should see inside the ecosystem. So, I think we should be seeing a reduction in either the emission schedule and to very little in terms of governance participation, or you earn governance participation through other activities. And those algos either not being released or being funneled into growing genuine TVL that has actual utility and brings value on chain. I think that would be the dream scenario. I'd like to see a change where we see node participation rewarded. I think Michelle and I differ a little bit in terms of our thinking around this particular topic. I think in order for there to be true decentralization of the node network, which is, I think, one of the final sort of missing pieces of what we really need to see to say this network is genuinely decentralized.
Yeah.
And it can't just be decentralized in terms of, I host 100 nodes and host them on different servers around the world, because the key piece of the decentralization component, this is a longer answer.
No, this is good. No,
the key piece of the decentralization component has to also be geographical, because it's also falling then into different regulatory domains. So we need people across the globe physically to be running nodes in their jurisdiction, which would really mean the network becomes, completely battle ready and future proofed. And I know the idea that we shouldn't need to, because of the pure proof of stake and the way the consensus mechanism works, but to operate a relay node right now is about 10 to 15,000 US per year. In reality, we need 1 to maybe 12,000 of them, depending on the size of the network, for it to be genuinely decentralized. They still need to be distributed. So if we've got 1,000 all in the US, it actually doesn't achieve the goal. But
right.
In order to do that, I think we need to incentivize people to actually, operate those nodes to ensure we see true decentralization. And I think a mechanism could be created where we can also, see it aim for the right sort of number we need. So it's not a case of, there's 100,000 of them unnecessarily. But
Right.
I think that's also a fundamental piece of what we kind of need to see from governance. And then, I think everyone's dream would be, if we are going to have governance votes, we do see a point where the community actually gets to be a part of what the votes look like. The only other piece I would really like to see, and this is probably more personally of where my thoughts have always gone around leadership and around decision making, it would be also great to see debates about the different questions that are on hand, because I feel like at the moment we sort of get posed the questions, there might be a little bit of information around it, but it would actually be great to see some of the leaders in the community actually talk about the different options, talk about why they might be positive or negative, and actually let people absorb the information they do to make informed decisions. I do think that becomes more meaningful as more people get involved in the process of deciding what we should vote on. But I think that would be the dream scenario. So I don't agree with the double voting. I don't know that that's a a sensible path, but I do agree with the idea of channeling this sort of huge emission schedule we have now that is providing algos for very low risk while the key piece of the ecosystem is struggling to grow. I do think we should be funneling that to push that quality growth.
Yeah.
And when I say quality growth too, I'm less excited about like a USDC USDT pair. I don't think they're particularly exciting. I think it's almost free yield in itself, other than taking the smart contract risk. But growing things like ALGO USDC, growing things like the money markets, growing things like the alternative trading pairs, so we can see real value and growth in the ecosystem. That means users can come in, start trading BTC, ETH, Algo, alts, getting loans, doing all those kinds of bits and pieces without having to leave and go somewhere else, because it doesn't make financial sense for all the transaction types you need to do.
Yeah. And you mentioned that Pact is one of your Meld Ventures is in your portfolio, and I saw that they're integrating Fireblocks. That's kind of a nice piece of news for like institutional investors and everything, right?
Look, it's actually going to be really brilliant. So we've got two pieces of what I would call sort of institutional grade tech coming to Algorand. Fireblocks integration, first part, which is brilliant for a certain type of company, because it's not really accessible to anyone. It's the expense of operating it, the additional features it offers aren't really styled to individuals, or it's really styled to larger organizations. And then we have things like Prismatic, which is going to be offering actually quite similar tech, but available to everyone, which I think will be brilliant as well. So we've got two key pieces that are missing, and so people understand why it's so important that these kind of technologies are built. At the moment, if you want to see a venture capital firm bring $1 billion on chain, they have to do it from a hot wallet. What it means is, in these kind of organizations that are generally not one person orgs, they're 10, 20, 50, 100 people organizations, a single person has to be responsible and have control of those funds. And keep in mind that almost never are those funds owned by that individual. They're owned by maybe a collective of 100 different LPs to that fund, which in reality, regardless of what's happening, it's not viable for most institutions to actually even come in and participate, because their mandate for the fund, for example, might mean that actually doesn't meet their security requirements, which means they just can't participate at all. So, this will be a really strong leap for that next sort of wave of funds entering the ecosystem.
Great. So today it seems like we got, a relief rally. The Fed was pretty aggressive here in the States, obviously, aggressive by raising interest rates 75 basis points. And that seemed to indicate to the market that they're serious about inflation and stuff like that. And so we're seeing a little bit of a relief. But I mean, look, I think it won't last. I think what is happening, we're in a bear market, and certainly in crypto. I mean, Bitcoin seems to have further to go, and Ethereum seems to have further to go. And, during bear markets, a lot of these VCs might be, a little less generous with their funds. And so that's not going to necessarily do wonders for TVL and projects in the ecosystem. So how does Algorand kind of keep going and grow and attract new talent and attract, money into the ecosystem in this market?
I think there's a couple of points I'll make here, and firstly, Algorand is in reality Algorand in terms of DeFi, in terms of genuine on-chain capabilities, such as contract-to-contract calls, and we're just seeing the unlimited expansion of on-chain data. These are all key requirements to actually grow the kind of protocols we need on Algorand to see that kind of adoption as well. What that really boils down to is it still is day one for Algorand. We really are brand new. What that then means in terms of the influx of funds, in reality, being that Teal is a fairly new language, we're still seeing things like PyTeal and Reach still developing and growing. Auditors are still finding their feet with this language. It's not a commonly understood language for auditors to be able to come in and really effectively and efficiently audit the code. What that really means is that for venture capital, it was going to be hard to see billions flow into the ecosystem because, there isn't the confidence. And I know, I've seen some comparisons by different people to things like Avalanche, for example. It's not the same. We've seen on Avalanche, we've seen incredibly big projects from Ethereum with teams that are battle tested and have been in the space for a long time, who also aren't having to change the code by a lot than deploying on Avalanche. And this is why they could see so much growth so fast, because it wasn't the same leap it is to participate on Algorand. So, for me and for AJ and Dustine and the team and I, for us, we see this as a really incredible opportunity to build and have this ecosystem battle ready for this next cycle. Because, this is our chance to spend the next 2 years building incredible products, ensuring that they're tested in market, ensuring that they're secure, ensuring that we're seeing growth around the way audits are done and around the security and around, the real prodding of the technology. And that'll give us then that time we need in order to see that flow in of funds and that confidence from the outside world, which I think will be fairly crucial. I do think what we'll see in terms of that financial side that you referred to, Coop, is raising money will definitely be more difficult. I think it'll be more difficult right now, probably more importantly, because I think for most of the funds, they're still trying to establish, what's happening, what's our plan of attack. But, in reality, they will be investing, and they will be investing in what they think is going to form a part of this next evolution of blockchain technology. What we will see, though, is a reduced valuation on a lot of businesses as they're going to market. Their seed prices will be lower, which makes complete sense. In reality, I think fundamentals will become more important. There'll be a lot more due diligence about what is your real business model? Where is the value really created here in building this product? And less about that sounds really cool and that should be a really interesting product. So I think, we will see a change, but if we then sort of talk to why, I think Algorand will be at the forefront of that next sort of round of investment. I think it's really looking to what do we think is the next cycle of blockchain's evolution. And I think, in reality, what we're going to see with things that happen with things like Terra and Luna, where we're now going to see regulation coming a little bit closer. AJ says this really well. With regulation coming closer, the rest of the world will also come closer because, an additional vote of confidence, which is sad that it takes regulators and governments to almost bestow confidence to some degree. But, as a part of that step closer, we will see this additional confidence and additional flow in of users. But this next evolution, will be real world use cases adopting distributed ledger technology to improve their systems and processes and improve what they do, which, if we sort of look at any technology that's poised for that kind of adoption, so whether that be contracts on chain, identity on chain, transacting across the globe, institutional data storage, bringing collectibles on chain, like we're seeing, NFTs being that first proof point of that, Algorand makes an incredible sense as a front runner for that technology move.
Absolutely. And, like I said, I just got back from Consensus, and Algorand is woefully undermentioned or understood. it is a, like people are like, is that a layer two? It's like, really? I guess me like living in the bubble. And I also think that that's probably, I'm like, well, you don't know? Well, you don't watch the ReCoop? What is going on? But I can, but I guess my point is that I also think that that's why the community got, so excited today, really. And it's the Ethereum Foundation, like, put their neck out to criticize Algorand, and they were wrong, and so it's like, it's almost legitimizing on some level. It's like, okay, finally they're mentioning it. I mean, and I'm not, I'm being a little dramatic. Like, obviously Algorand's on the radar. People know who Silvio McCauley is, and but it isn't quite understood. And that's like the whole thing, where we're going to lead with the tech. But if people don't understand the tech, I mean, if the guys at the Ethereum Foundation don't understand the tech, like, then, people don't understand how good it is. I mean, that's case in point right there, right?
Completely. And look, I think,
Yeah.
uh, I think it was a strange time for Ethereum to also be posting this, like it's chaos out there at the minute. It felt like a really odd moment in time to see this
Yeah.
come out. So I don't quite know sort of what was going on in the background to sort of cause that.
Yeah.
As much as I'd like to comment on what they were talking about, it was well beyond me. I think for
Okay.
most people who read Paul's response was even like, all right, that
Okay.
seems that seems like I definitely don't understand. So this
Yeah.
is this is beyond
Well,
me.
I'm glad you too. I did a algo rant earlier, and I revealed, like, look, I don't. All I know is that it sure seemed like he was right, and then there's definitely no lattices in our verifiable random function. I know that. Okay.
Oh
Yeah.
no, look, Paul's response was brilliant. Like, and I think it really boiled down to that there wasn't enough research, or which I think is also probably a fundamental issue. In reality, I think it would have been great for Ethereum Foundation to reach out to Algorand and say, "Hey guys, this is what we found. Can we get your feedback?"
Yeah.
Would have actually been a brilliant approach, which is why I sort of feel like it was a really strange, play out in terms of timing and in terms of not actually having a discussion with Algorand, which would have been, I think, the ideal scenario. But understanding is key. And again, the Australia Zoo launch was a great example. How many people were like, "Oh God, this is terrible," and I think it's it's where we need to have more of a voice out there about what this technology is capable of, what it is doing, provide real world examples. And
Yeah.
it's going to take consistency. I think we need a concerted effort to get the message out there. I probably feel less worried about the blockchain community becoming more educated. Like, I obviously think that's really valuable to bring DeFi funds across and everything like that. But if we actually look at the stats of how many true blockchain users are out there that are using it on a regular basis, we're talking absolutely tiny numbers on a global scale. I think
Yeah.
the real battlefront is educating the public on, hey, no, it's not all scams. It's not all
Yeah.
bad for the environment. It's not this terrible boogeyman that you've heard about in the closet. This is
Yeah.
actual real technology that brings real value to your everyday lives and can create genuine, um, powerful implications for the globe, whether it be through reducing carbon footprint and
Mhm.
reducing, so many different types of transactions now that are done in terrible ways, and bring them on chain and reducing cost and reducing time spent. And I think that is really where we need to be spending our energy, is making sure that this sort of next generation, the next billion users, actually understands which technology they should be looking to use in their everyday lives.
Okay, so here we go. So you get approached by somebody that knows nothing about blockchain technology. They've heard that most of these things are a Ponzi scheme. They say these are all Ponzi's. It's just you're throwing your money at nothing, and you're going to lose it all. And that's what it is. It's just greater fool theory. Like, there's no point. There's no point. Okay, so you have a JPEG. I mean, or you have okay, you have some magical internet money that is eventually going to go to zero. What is your response to somebody like that, that you feel inclined to defend the value of blockchain technology?
And I do get this a lot.
Yeah.
I often get people, and this is where I sort of say patience, because I often can reply in what I think is a really clear message, and you can still get this sort of response that obviously didn't really take in what you've said.
Yeah.
And the key there is being patient, because I think to win over the community, it's going to take us all collectively holding their hands, being quite humble and helpful in bringing them in and actually embracing them into this space, I think will be really key. For most people, I sort of, I try to use some real world examples because I find it's probably the most meaningful. So first of all, I talk about, we look at any new technology. Look at the first mobile phones, like you needed a little wheelbarrow to roll it around with. I'm sure it used huge amount of plastic. I'm sure it was horrible for the environment. It probably caused brain cancer because, that was emitting all kinds of crazy stuff out of them. No one could afford one. Almost no one had one.
Yeah.
That wasn't the technology itself. That wasn't where it was going. That was the proof point. This was the proof point that, hey, this is what's actually it's possible to do. And I think if we look across the board, even early internet was in the same category. In reality, it wasn't going to be perfect on day one. No technology is perfect on day one. It's the fundamentals of what can be achieved with this technology. With mobile phones, it was the ability to communicate from anywhere in the world easily, from a personal device. And, we look at the evolution of what that's actually done, from those first phones to what we have now is just incredible. And how much has changed the world is just insane. And I think the internet in the same category. Early internet was a nightmare. I don't know if anyone was on there in the early days, but it was chaos. But the concept and what it could do with expanding on that technology is really where we needed to end up. And blockchain technology is going through the same cycle. The early version is not the final version. The early version was the proof point of what we could do if we really build on this kind of incredible technology. And Algorand, I think, is a fundamental piece of that end version of where we'll ideally see that technology. If we then go to a real world use case, I love the NFT one. For starters, too, the noise is really hard for people to see through. Cryptocurrency noise, JPEGs, it's all very difficult. Like it's the most exciting, dramatic piece of news. So it's, of course, what most people hear about. It's also, of course, the thing people remember. No one remembers that Silvio McCarley, was the co-inventor of zero knowledge proofs. No one remembers that piece. They remembered how much a Bored Ape sold for or a CryptoPunk sold for. You tell them both bits of information, they've forgotten the Silvio McCarley piece in seconds.
How many houses they could have bought for a picture of some
100%. It's human nature, and this is where the consistency and the patience again sort of comes in. But I like to use the NFT scenario. And firstly, NFTs weren't designed for JPEGs originally. They were designed for things like contracts and identity and other kinds of data.
Yeah.
But, I'm a basketball card collector from back in the day. It was like, all I did as a teenager was buy and trade basketball cards. It was brilliant. And I look back at that as a collectibles hobby. For me, the early Michael Jordan rookie cards, for example, now are worth an incredible amount of money. Minted or printed on a fraction of a cent of cardboard with a fraction of a cent of ink. Stats now show there are more counterfeits than genuines out there in market that can become incredibly hard to distinguish from each other. Huge environmental impact to produce. You had packs, you had the cartons, you had to ship them globally. Every time you sell one, it's a nightmare of a process. You lose huge fees selling it on eBay. You've then got to ship it. You've got another huge carbon footprint to ship this tiny card. The process is horrendous. Why in the world would that be an improvement on a digital version on chain that has full provenance, that is immutable, that can't be counterfeited, that has full liquidity, that you can trade in seconds with anyone in the globe, trustlessly in hundreds of different currencies, that has almost no carbon footprint, that you can take anywhere at any time, that you can borrow against, that has this incredible amount of utility and this incredible amount of value. Why in the world would that cryptographically secure digital version of that card be any worse than the sub-a-cent printed version? And that's the example I kind of love because I find a lot of people can relate to that and go, okay, well, I can see that seems insane. Why would that be better? But, again, I think as human nature, we're stuck in this idea of tangible was real. And I think that is changing, but, it is going to be a process.
Right. So then, well, first of all, do you have a Michael Jordan rookie card?
I did.
You did,
Not
but you got rid of it.
I sold it.
That was
PSA
the
10,
card.
the whole kit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Did you sell it recently at least?
Not as recent as I would have liked.
Okay. Because that's a 2020 or later, you'd have gotten a nice price, I'm sure. But I'm sure you did fine. That was the card that I always wanted. My best friend when I was a kid was gifted that by his dad. And I was like, fucking, my dad sucks. But I'll never get a Michael Jordan rookie card. All right. So, but moving on. So then, okay, on the flip side of that, so then why are cryptocurrencies worth anything? Why aren't they just all Ponzi schemes with greater fool theory? Like, what's going on, Michael? Like, I'm sure you have people asking this to you all the time, right? I mean, there must be people. They're always asking me, what's your answer to that?
Um, what's going on, Michael? Felt very pointed, by the way, Coop. It felt like a very dangerous question. Look, I don't think they're wrong in many ways. I think the market is incredibly inflated. We're in this sort of wild hype zone. And look, this doesn't just happen in blockchain and crypto. There's plenty of assets on the stock exchange that, if you actually look at the fundamentals, so much of it is built on hopium and not necessarily on fundamentals. But I think this is what we'll really see the change. In reality, in many ways, I think tokens will need to replace real world examples of existing structures. And I think that this will be truer than ever for things like tokens. Now, that might include representing art and representing collectibles and representing contracts. It might include representing equity, the equivalent of trustless, autonomous, transparent equity. It could include memberships. It could include community passes. But I really think what we will need to see, and I think we'll see a value adjustment in the market because of this. I think what we really need to see is us taking proven models from the real world and doing exactly what blockchain was intended to do, which is replacing a lot of what they do manually and painfully and opaquely with blockchain technology. So I do think cryptocurrency and can be incredibly overvalued in the sense that it doesn't necessarily have the necessary fundamentals to support that valuation.
Right.
And so I do think we will see a reckoning in terms of what happens. This doesn't necessarily mean, we see everything go to 1% of what it was, or 10% or 20% or 50%. I think what it'll mean is there will need to be more being done by projects to ensure there is a value proposition behind their tokens that makes sense.
Right.
And I still see a lot of products out there that, you start pulling at threads as to where the value is, and it can be very hard to identify.
Right. And you mentioned it. You said that we're in the early days of blockchain technology. So, the earliest technology that most people know about, and there was predecessors, but is Bitcoin, right? And that is a simple technology. It is simple. It's not simple, but it's more. There's a basic. It's a clarity to it, or whatever. Now, do you feel like Bitcoin is going to be outdated, or are you and it's going to be these newer technologies like Algorand and things like that, or whatever comes next? Or do you see Bitcoin as that store of value that will persist?
AJ and I actually have this debate quite regularly, and we probably sit at slightly different sides of the conversation, which I actually think is incredibly valuable. I think a good debate and a civil, friendly debate that's intended to discover and understand the other side is something
Right.
we lack a lot in the world today. I think there's a lot of people actually angrily sitting on opposite sides, and there's quite polarized sides to discussions. So I do think we need to see more conversations that are genuinely exploratory to try and learn and better collectively. And AJ and I have the Bitcoin debate constantly. And that's mostly because for me, I have complete respect that Bitcoin was first. I have complete respect with what they built. But, I probably see the future of money, which is really what I think Bitcoin is, and this is probably the difference between Bitcoin and Algorand. Algorand is a technology, and it does have a fundamental concept that, the token in theory will become deflationary as we see the need to lock up 0.1 algo per asset in your wallet. So we're going to see the reduction of in circulation. It's going to become the token that's required to transact, and it'll become the rails for the world in terms of data exchange, which could be, when I say data exchange, that can be dollars or it could be identity.
Right. And I
Whereas,
think just sorry to interrupt you, and
no,
I feel like I am derailing you right now, but it is worth noting when it comes to algo that as all of these transactions, which are, millions of transactions, we think, oh, it's so easy to transact, so cheap, but when there is, things like FIFA, the NASDAQ, however big it gets, when it becomes that volume of transactions, those transaction fees will eventually add up, right?
look, that and assets on chain with that point one algo that will cause more and more algo to be locked up as well. I think there's a
Yeah.
genuine analysis that needs to be done as to what that point one algo lockup will mean in 10 years, because I think we need to ensure it's not going to be actually problematic at some point. But
Right.
completely. And I think the other difference too, Coop, is to your point that we're going to see a lot of transactions happening on Algorand that wouldn't happen normally on a lot of other blockchains because it wouldn't make sense. So it's
Right.
also not comparing apples for apples. We're not saying, oh, one day we'll get to the same transaction volume as X in terms of financial transactions, because Algorand will do hundreds of things that you wouldn't do on other chains,
Yeah.
which means we'll see a lot of transactions that wouldn't normally take place.
Right.
So, which is why Algorand needs to have so much more throughput in order to keep up with that demand that we'll have. But back on the
Yeah.
Bitcoin front, before I
Yeah.
forget,
Thank you. Yeah. Wow.
um,
Great. Go ahead. I'm
um,
great at this. I just like to interrupt people mid thought and make sure I can get my thought in. All right, go ahead.
uh, look, and someone much smarter than me, it'd be good to talk about the global economy and what money looks like in the future, because I think my thoughts are without formal training. That probably means that I might be saying something very dumb right now, but I'm going to roll with it.
Good.
For me, I've always seen the future of money something that does have some kind of intrinsic value, and I think relatable value in terms of genuine supply and demand. So traditionally that's been gold.
Yeah.
Gold may play a role in that depending on what its actual commercial usages is. But in reality, I think there are other assets that will probably play more value in what is a currency in the future.
Hmm.
Some of those could be digital, such as things like ALGO that are actually genuinely needed to run the financial systems or the rails that we're talking about that the world will transact on.
Yeah.
Some of that could be digitized water, could become a global currency, or digitized grain holdings or other assets that we genuinely need and genuinely have utility, that genuinely have, relatable value. Blockchain technology potentially makes that incredibly easy for it to be priced. We also traditionally had, these currencies as this settlement layer because it gave a relative value that was sort of universal to, in the case of fiat, a region. I don't know how important that'll be for the future. I think the ability to easily route between almost any pairing, in seconds at almost no cost with something like Algorand may remove some of those barriers that were sort of traditional issues that were being solved. So in short, Bitcoin, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Like I'm definitely a fan of Bitcoin, and in the short term, I think it's one of the really strong candidates as an alternative to the fiat system. Along with gold, I think is in a very similar boat. But, in terms of what the future lies in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, I think it'll be quite interesting to sort of see, what we desire and what we collectively believe is valuable. And I think it's going to be things that have genuine utility on a global scale that, we collectively understand and would collectively take physical ownership of, or need ownership of in the digital format like Algo, in order to function.
Right. And so AJ, your partner, he takes the other side of this argument.
Look, I shouldn't say that because he would. I think he'd need to be here to propose his thoughts on this as well. So maybe we should do that debate one day, because I think it would actually be quite fun.
That would be
Um,
fun. We
yeah,
can
I
do
did
it
a
here.
gold. Yeah, for sure. I
Yeah.
think AJ would be up for it as well. I recently did not that recently, over a year ago now, but did a debate about gold with Henrik Anderson, which is one of the key Bitcoin investors in Australia, which was really fun as well. I actually really enjoyed that debate. But yeah, so I think he probably doesn't necessarily agree with what I'm thinking. And look, I think this is the brilliance of these kind of conversations, is you can really sort of prod each other and, see where the gaps are. Maybe you can help fill a gap. Maybe you can help poke a hole, but I think
Yeah.
it's sort of the key for us actually progressing.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's some people out there being like, well, sure, Michael Cotton thinks it should have intrinsic. He's the gold guy. Like, yeah, of course that's what he
Well,
thinks.
and look, I think the difference is, does it need to be physical? I think, because I don't necessarily think it does. Like, I think algo will have intrinsic value if algo becomes the rails for everything, or for a majority of transactions in data in the world. There's an intrinsic value to the algo because it's required to hold assets and to transact. So, I suppose what does intrinsic mean is a good question. 10 years ago, it was definitely gold.
Yeah.
Now it's gold and others.
Yeah, it sure is. I mean, 10 years ago, the price of gold would not be $1,800. It would be
Yeah.
more than that in an environment like this, I'm sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I feel like, I mean, maybe I'm reading into it, but you're like, wait, this wasn't, what are we doing? We're talking all about Bitcoin. Like, was this what you were expecting, Michael?
I'm good. I'll roll with it, Coop. It's fine with
Rolling.
me.
Okay, good. All right. Well, so okay, here we are. We're back. I'm sweating buckets. Now let's just kind of tie this together with what's coming. Like, what do you see? Last time we talked, you talked about the the Algorand, the Algo summer, and I believe we've started. When we found out since then, we found out about FIFA. We have such the acquisition of Napster, LimeWire. There's these big names, and FIFA is also exciting because it's not just a sponsorship. Potentially we're talking about tickets and NFTs and whatever else. The trading cards, like you're talking about, the World Cup trading cards and all these things. And so, but outside of that, like what is next? What's next for Meld? What's next for Algorand? And what do you think is just next in general?
So I think in terms of, like, there's the platforms that we actually have um, coming to market. So, projects like Polynize, Prismatic, the guys at Wayru. We've got Meadow Labs, who just did the Australia Zoo. They've got other IP coming to market as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're also doing some other incredible work in the background that will be announced soon. We've got projects like Hone, which is the liquid staking for Algorand, launching. We really do just have this sort of long list of incredible projects coming to market. Cosmic Champs, I think, launches next week from memory.
Mm-hmm.
So we really do have a long list of great things coming to market. I think the key for the community is to really help support the builders that are doing good work. And that doesn't necessarily mean financially. I think it also just means, getting in there and using the product and on testnet and helping them with feedback and helping really improve what the ecosystem is trying to grow, because we do need to battle test for this next 2 years. So we are ready for, the next wave of adoption.
Yeah.
In terms of, for us, I think what we're really focused on is what we believe is this next phase for blockchain tech, which is, real use of blockchain technology to improve current processes and systems and products. So for us, we're really leaning into supporting and backing more and more founders. We're going to be doing more and more incubation and building out these products we think will be, crucial to this next wave of adoption. On top of that, I think we're going to spend a lot more time on the education piece as well. So trying to really ensure that we can help get the message out there about what blockchain can actually really do when you're using technology like Algorand. So, when we get through this next phase and we have all these great products and all this great technology for the community to use, they actually are interested in using it.
Yeah.
So we do need both. But yeah, so I think that's really sort of the core of what we've got focused on for this sort of next period.
So it sounds like your thoughts are we're in a bit of a winter and it's going to last a couple of years.
We need to be building, and look,
Yeah.
we definitely have this next sort of bright period of actual great things you can do. Like, and I think, forgetting the financial side as much, you'll be able to do so much more on Algorand in these next months. There'll be so many possibilities. You can actually start playing around with different strategies and using different kinds of products and getting more involved and immersed in the ecosystem, in a way that's more than us talking about how good it's going to be, which will be brilliant.
Yeah.
But for most of the projects, in terms of on the financial side, this is the time to build, and to build great product, and to build thinking about what this next sort of evolution of tech looks like.
Well, yeah, and it's been delivered. From the first conversation that we had at ALGO Fest, there was a lot of what we're gonna be able to do when things start to launch. And since that day, which, like we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, that's less than a year ago. And it sure is, right? Yeah, it's less than a year ago. And now there's a lot that you can do. And in a couple of months, like you're saying, there's going to be even more. And so we're going in the right direction. And right now it's less time, it's less about your gains and more about if you believe in this, and it's going to separate the weak and from the strong, the guys that actually believe in this and what it can provide the world. And and when you're down here and you're accumulating on the financial side, if you're right about what it's going to provide, you're going to be fine financially in the future.
Look, and I think the other one too for all the community out there is I think it's great to help people get involved and help educate them as well,
Yeah, yeah,
and giving up a little bit of time to sort of help people really understand what the
yeah,
ecosystem is about and what this technology is about. And look, we do need to see easier ways to participate as well. It still could be easier, and I think this is a
yeah.
part of that next tech leap. This next 2 years, I think we'll see a lot of tech built that'll make it much easier for people to participate.
Absolutely. And then, when I talk to, you or other builders, a big focus is how can we make this just be in the background where it feels like Web 2, but it's actually Web 3, where people can just click on a button, less buttons, less pushing and less not knowing what's going to happen and things just showing up quickly. And that's what Algorand provides, right?
And look, not to extend your sauna session, Coop, but um, but in reality too, I think for most of us that are here early, we are early adopters, which means we aren't necessarily the same as everyone else.
Yeah.
Which is a particular type of people that are willing to take the risk and go through the heartache of dealing with
Yeah.
tech that's clunky and more difficult. For blockchain adoption in the form that we use it today, it would require most of the world to manage things like private keys,
Yeah.
which in reality is unlikely to be the case. I think most people aren't actually prepared for that responsibility.
Yeah.
They aren't prepared, and they potentially aren't willing. What we need to see on that tech side is something between the two worlds. That means they can participate in a fashion, like you say, that feels very Web 2, without necessarily giving up the control that we take for granted when you're in the space deeply. I think we need to see that tech built that's sort of the bridges. I feel like bridge sort of is confusing because it's not necessarily the same bridge we're talking about, but that
Yeah.
sort of bridges that gap and allows that audience that won't want to manage private keys start to participate without sort of giving up everything that blockchain brings to the table. And look, Celsius was a good example. It's a centralized system, and we've seen the issues that's now caused by having something that's still purely in that traditional camp and not somewhere between the two worlds. That
Yeah.
means you have access without giving up all those benefits of blockchain.
Well, and Celsius makes a wonderful case for regulation. I mean, they were just degens in the background, and now they're trying to, they're throwing a Hail Mary. So hopefully Alex is Aaron Rodgers, because he seems to be able to actually land those Hail Marys. But I will say before we go, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Michael. You seem to be the perfect person to be out there informing people, educating people. So it's just because it's one of those things, right? I've noticed, like, if you're defensive in your answers, people turn off. If you are trying to show how smart you are in the way you respond to somebody because they're asking a stupid question, it turns people off. So if people have a stupid question about be kind and give them an answer. Let them go on their way knowing more. No need to be the smartest guy in the room sometimes. No need to defend your honor so quickly. I don't know if
And
that
look,
makes sense.
because the big thing is it actually doesn't achieve the goal that we all want to see, which is
Yeah.
I think our ultimate goal is that people embrace this technology,
Yeah.
and like you say, we're actually alienating people through those
Yeah.
kind of responses. And I always remind myself, what's the goal here? The goal here is we want everyone to adopt, both for their benefit
Yeah.
and for a global benefit, a collective benefit. So I always sort of have to remind myself that is the goal. What best achieve that goal? And I think that's, if we can all apply the same thought process, we'll be killing it.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much. Of course, you're always welcome to come back. I love checking in with you. And yeah, well, here we go. Bear market. Let's do it.
Thanks, Coop. Really appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks,
All
everyone.
right.